I think that there's a ton to be done in the CFO stack. I think we're only getting started. In the sea of solutions that came to market, the vast majority that came in the bull run were for sales, marketing, IT, revenue generating stuff, and CFO stack was kind of left behind. Of course, it's getting more attention now. And more solutions are being built, but also like simply counting how many solutions came to market is not enough. Like I think that one of the questions that are not being asked is which CFO, because not all CFOs are alike. Like if you have a B2B or B2C or marketplace or inventory, non-inventory, that sort of stuff, like the product and services that you sell really mandate the processes that you need.
Hello and welcome to Tech for Finance, where we help finance professionals leverage technology to level up their lives. I'm your host, Adam Shilton, and in this episode, we're chatting with Roi Ben Daniel, founder and CEO at Received, an AR platform that helps finance teams solve complex billing challenges. Roi started his career as a platoon commander in the Israel Defense Forces before moving into the venture and technology space, working at Visa for 7 years before founding Received. In his spare time, Roi loves camping with friends and is an open fire cooking expert, which is amazing. But before we start today, if you like what you hear, please make sure to subscribe to Tech for Finance on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. But really appreciate you joining me today, Roi. It's good to have you on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, no worries. So apologies if you've been asked this question before, but going from sort of the forces into kind of venture and tech, I mean, how did it would be good to learn a little bit more about the story and then how Received then sort of became a thing following your experience. So if you want to give us a bit of the background and how you ended up where you ended up today, that'd be really good.
Yeah, sure. I mean, starting with the Army experience, I served for 4 years in the military. I was a tank platoon commander. That means leading 3 tanks and about 15 soldiers, and that included a bunch of wars and very intense combat and training situations. And you spend 4 years in these positions and responsibilities in your early 20s. That's gonna mold your who you are, your personality. So I took a bunch of values and structure from that period, the way I am as a leader today. Of course, I formed and kind of evolved through the years, but a bunch of values stuck with me. And today when I think about who I am as a leader, I think about leading without authority and getting my hands dirty, and it gave me a ton of perspective. So I really appreciate my time in the Armored Corps. After that, I was 24 and really starting my civilian life. Studied law and accounting, pretty much on a whim. I'll be honest. My older sister and brother all studied finance and law and stuff like that, and I was traveling in South America with my girlfriend at the time, and I remember just registering from a internet cafe, and it was, I always liked business, but it was an obvious choice. I just followed the path of my elders. That was when I was a bit less of a contrarian and an independent thinker, but it brought me where I am today, and I'm really happy with that. So I speak finance, but I didn't really take that route. I also did my master's with the University of Chicago, a pretty finance-focused school later on. Again, as I think many good things in life, I kind of stumbled upon fintech. I didn't planet after two lousy jobs, and being unemployed for 8 months. I got called. I got this opportunity to interview with Visa and be um, their first partnership and venture person in Tel Aviv. I knew nothing about fintech, but I had enough background, to fill in the gap. Um, and I really coincidentally stumbled upon really the industry that I love, which is where financial industry and technology meet. Um, yeah, and my time at Visa was absolutely amazing. Of course, every corporate has its downfalls, but it's a flat organization, and I joined Visa at a pretty exciting time when the networks, Visa and Mastercard, just started to work with non-traditionals. Up till then, like 2015, fintech wasn't a thing, or at least wasn't a big thing. And, fintech was starting to eat up market share and open new channels, um, create new payment flows, serve underserved communities, or um, new products for B2B, and so on and so on. And I was part of a team that did the strategy early on of how you take the commercial compliance regulation frameworks, uh, which are pretty heavy frameworks, and amend those of working with fintechs. And then, because Visa is a pretty flat organization, I was also privileged enough or lucky enough to set up the commercial team in Tel Aviv, and we grew it from no activity to tens of millions of dollars in revenue. Was also part of Visa Ventures. So that was an amazing time. And at Visa, you can just, because payments is such a wide and deep space, you can study all day, every day. It's a never-ending learning experience. Um, and at my time at Visa, I kind of fell in love with B2B payments. I call B2B payments the unfulfilled prophecy. And and why is that? That's because it's a bigger, in terms of objective numbers. I think it's twice as large as B2C. I think it's 10 trillion and 20 trillion. Those are the numbers.
Okay,
And
so
it's like,
small numbers then.
sorry.
Small numbers then.
Yeah, it's like the whole world
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Um, and like every earnings call, and every like C-level thing, they will talk about the B2B opportunity, but it kind of seemed like nothing was happening, and kind of people or the company was looking under the lamppost. What I mean by that is that really today I believe that in B2B, of course, the payment mechanics is important, but the value unlock is in the process. And I think spend management is a great case study for that. Brex and Ramp and Mesh and those guys, I'm exaggerating on purpose, they really did nothing new. They coupled expense management, which was there before, with smart issuance, the B2B card rails, and the Visa and MasterCard API, by the way. And they built consumer grade systems, enterprise grade systems for the mid market. And that's how they grew and really took off. But it's a process thing. It's not a payment thing. Payment is driving a lot of that, but it's not in the payment. It's around the payment because you're serving our organization. So I'll just finish off in kind of the origin story of Received, is that during my time at Visa, I worked with CEOs and founders of companies that grew from seed to pretty big companies like Melio and Rapid and Mesh and Payem and Tipalti and many others. And, I got a sneak peek at the operational side, and I saw how CFOs struggle with, complex billing. And, it just came my time that I wanted to create something on my own, and that's things came together, and that's kind of the origin story.
Very good. Thanks for that. And it's fascinating to hear the background. And it's funny where inspiration comes as well, isn't it? Quite often find that it's an itch that you have to scratch, right? I'm sure it was in your case as a company founder. You probably got to the point where you thought, I've seen enough of this, and I've heard about the challenges enough. I actually need to do something about it, and I need to build something, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just a good thumb rule for career building is that most of the stuff is just going to be thrown at you.
Mm.
And I think having a vector is great, but you also got to have that flexibility of being flexible and opportunistic to, really grab opportunity by both hands. Because you can't expect almost anything. Who knows what's going to happen in 12 months, So flexibility is so important with this stuff.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to start sort of with, I know we shared some discussion topics before this session, but I've actually been having a bit of a scratch through some of your LinkedIn posts, and the one that I saw was a graph. I think was it Felicis or Felicis or however you pronounce it. That I'm assuming that just did a bit of research, but the question asked was what your top 3 priorities for finance software investments in 2023. And of course, there's been this massive buzz around AI recently, and all of this talk of the next wave of CFO, CFO 5.0, 6.0, or whatever number we're up to now, right? But the list still seems to remain pretty static. So the top 3 on there are procurement. You've got billing and invoicing, that obviously you fall into that category. But then you've got AP automation and spend management that come a little bit further down. But to me, these graphs kind of look the same year on year. And I'm keen to get your perspective on, surely we should be getting past the point now that we're not looking at the same things all the time. You see what I mean? Or is it just a case of saying, right, well, we've got that many new businesses that procurement is always going to be an issue, billing is always going to be an issue. But it's interesting to see that there's always similar themes, whether it's 2020, 2023, or probably 2028.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think that there's a ton to be done in the CFO stack. I think we're in many ways we're only getting started. In the sea of solutions that came to market, the vast majority that came in the bull run that we just experienced were for sales, marketing, IT, revenue generating stuff, and CFO was kind of CFO stack was kind of left behind. And I think in many ways it's one of the last digital frontiers in the organization. Of course, it's getting more attention now, and more solutions are being built. But also, like, simply counting how many solutions came to market is not enough. Like, I think that one of the questions that are not being asked is which CFO, because not all CFOs are alike. Like, if you have a B2B or B2C or marketplace or inventory, non-inventory, all that sort of stuff, like the products and services that you sell really mandate the processes that you need. Your size also mandate what you need. Like if you're SMB, QuickBooks will be enough, like a one-stop shop, and even spreadsheets are great for you. I'm always, on a side note, I always find it perplexing fighting spreadsheets, because for young companies, spreadsheets are great. But as you become specialized, and as the company grows into a mid-market company, like core mid-market and upper mid-market, your needs change, and the industry that you're in mandate that. And I think what we're going to see now is more verticalized solutions. that are kind of the analogy I like is the sun and the planets. The sun being ERP, right? Intact, NetSuite, so on,
Mm-hmm.
and verticalized planets that have great connectivity tissue into your ERP and CRM. And I think from what I'm seeing, we're really only getting started.
Yeah, and I'd agree. And going back to the chart, so not number three on that was AP automation, right? And there's a ton of AP automation solutions on the market, right? Obviously, there's different levels of it. Are we just talking about invoice recognition, or is there a wider remit, as you say? What type of business are we? What's the complexity of our process? What solution do we need for that process? But to me, in terms of my feeling, is that the basics of AP automation in terms of invoice capture and OCR, that should not be a challenge that should exist in the next few years. There's technology now at a relatively low cost that should just facilitate that, right? So my perspective is there will always be elements that remain the same. Businesses will always try and make sure that they're reducing costs where they can, making sure that they're improving revenue where they can. But that stuff that falls into that category of, essentially repeat work should cease to exist. And that's my hope anyway, because it's the only way that we're actually going to have more interesting, fulfilling jobs, right?
Yeah, I tend to agree, but also there's another consideration is that the fact that the technology is available doesn't mean that people necessarily adopt it, and for example, there's certainly a changing of the guard in terms of CFOs. Like there's a generational shift. Millennials are becoming VP finance CFOs. They're much more tech savvy. They think system first. They think data first. They're system architects. And not to downplay anyone, I mean, but the CFO generation before that is different. They maybe have different strength, but I think technology is not necessarily one of them, and maybe that's part of the explanation.
And we can come back, because I know one of the topics that we can build on a little bit more is that generational shift. So hold that thought. We'll come back to there. But
Sure.
I would be inclined to agree, because what I've seen is less patience with younger finance teams, shall we say. And I'm using the term patience because, as I always say, we've all got that monkey on that shoulder that says, I need instant gratification, and people that have grown up with mobile phones, tablets, the internet, all of that sort of stuff, they know that in theory they should be able to download an app for that, right? So what I'm seeing more of is the quick to implement, especially in the mid-market, zero type solutions that they can then add on stuff like, Approval Max for procurement, and whatever the latest cash flow forecasting tool is, and all of that sort of stuff. So I think there is a new generation of people that are, to use your terminology, investing in point solutions because they know where to go, they know how to narrow the focus on what's required. But coming back to your point there about that definitely being a generational shift, because if you've got somebody who isn't used to downloading apps on their phone or isn't used to adopting technology quickly, there's more thought process involved. There's more, I guess, fear around altering process and that sort of thing. So is that along the similar lines of what you're talking about when you talk about generational shift, or is it a little bit more for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's not even just the consumer experience. I mean, I think the up and coming millennial CFOs grew up in their work life with systems and tools. And remember, the generation before those, they experienced the transition of coming from offline. They were the first to adopt Excel. We kind of forget that Excel hasn't been around for a century. It's a relatively, when you put a wider perspective on it, it's a relatively new thing. And among us, some CFOs that roam the earth are, still have done stuff in a calculator with, on paper and stuff like that. We tend to forget that. And of course, when you don't grow into organizational systems, you're not as, you're not as skilled, and you don't have the right mindset to adopt those systems. So I think we're going to see a growing adoption rate as millennials really fill in the gaps.
And my prediction, and I spoke about this with Chris Bell, who's co-founder of a company called Luca. They built ChatGPT when it first released into Zero, so you could have like a chatbot with Zero that was quite cool. And the topic of discussion that we had there was basically increasing the time that you need to spend, or that you could spend, on more basic solutions, shall we say, before needing to move to an ERP. Because if you do have a more modern, CFO tech stack, shall we say, where it's very easy to piece things together, then you can hold off longer before having to make that big jump to the latest and greatest expensive, all singing and all dancing ERP system. Right? And it seems like every conversation I have just kind of reinforces that. Why over-engineer something where you're not of the complexity as a business that would warrant that investment? Whereas, years before, the only way to get access to certain capability was to go through a really long and intrusive ERP implementation process. So I don't know whether you're seeing that in terms of that sort of tipping point before going from point solutions to ERP. I don't know whether you share my perspective there.
I think the next point is kind of related. I think that and this is not talked about enough. I think that in recent years, not many years, we're seeing companies building for the mid-market, right? So QuickBooks is a veteran, Coupa is a veteran, but there was not a lot in between. You know what I mean? And I think that the success of the new CFO stack, and those include also the what are now also are now the incumbents, like you can throw in their Tipalti and Bill.com and Bill Trust. I think they were the first to build for mid-market. And I think that really changed the paradigm. And now you see still building for mid-market, but more verticalized solution, because solutions 1.0, just generic solutions that just don't cut it, as we said before, in that specific category that you're in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to see that transition, isn't it? Because going back to the old school software implementations, you'd have a system built from the ground up, wouldn't you? Could take months. You need a specialist consultant. And then it wasn't always guaranteed that you'd end up with a good system at the end of the process, right? And then we've kind of seen the shift to more standardized systems, whereby it is more of a plug and play approach. And my recommendation whenever I speak to people is, if there's any way that you can standardize your business process around the way that systems work, it sometimes makes your ability to scale as an organization easier, because you're not always fighting technology. You're just going with best practice. Now, until now, I think you're dead right, is the discussion previously has always been, right, well, do we find a niche unknown player in the market, which there probably weren't many that's specific to our industry? And there are still players like this, right? But it would be high risk because the software author would be an unknown entity. You wouldn't necessarily have a massive amount of confidence in their finances, for example. So if you invest in the solution and they go bust, what's going to go on there? But then you almost had like the opposite end of the spectrum, is right. Well, we'll just go with the mainstream, like a Sage, an SAP, a NetSuite, whatever it happens to be. But we lose some of that niche capability that we need as this type of company in this industry. And I think you're right that there is more and more technologies filling those different gaps in between the hyper niche and the just going for the mainstream solution. But I think the difficulty that a lot of people have, and again, interested to hear your perspective on this, is it's not always just ERP versus a more modular point solution approach. It could be an ERP plus point solutions depending on your industry. So I think that's where a lot of people struggle is, at what point am I of the maturity that I would need an ERP, or can I just stick with a basic finance system and build with point solutions forever and a day? And I think that's where the amount of technology and that sort of decision fatigue comes in, because there's so much now that people kind of don't really know where to go. So I don't know whether you've got a perspective on that or whether I'm making sense, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to say here. Listen, I think that when when you outgrow what you have, what that's what we see with CFOs that we speak with and with our customers. Like one of the most repeated sentences that CFOs tell us is, "This is not scalable." And this can be anything. This can be the spreadsheets or a spreadsheet, or this can be QuickBooks. I think that the CFO, or maybe some CFOs or the good CFOs, they always think about how it's still mid-market and up, how I prepare my company for an IPO, right? How do I have consistent data in my organization? How does discrepancy is not a thing between sales and finance? How can I, in a second, answer a question about what was my revenue in March? What is my expected cash flow in June, right? And if they feel like the current system doesn't do it, they'll seek a system. What we see actually in the market today, on a side note, is that there's kind of a contradicting thing, because CFOs are the watch guards, and they're doing the system purge that is happening now. Like they're cutting in the flesh, like really removing all the fat from the SaaS systems that are unnecessary for the organization. But on the other hand, they're actually seeking and buying CFO solutions. So they're smart about what's needed for the organization. A second bit of information, and again, I'm trying to condense this can be an hour worth of talk.
Thank you.
Is the second part is that also within the categories of the CFO stack, there's also movement. Like there's always this friction between, or tension between, point solutions and a full ERP. So I think no one thinks that a full ERP is going to cut it. Actually, there are newer ERPs and founders I speak with that adopted the new ERPs. I'm not going to mention their names, the new ERPs. Absolutely hate them. Expensive and don't really meet their needs. And it's kind of a visceral response, which actually surprised me. On the other end, of course, you can't adopt 50 solutions. That's ridiculous, right? So I think the CFO stack is going to have, maybe 10 solutions, just as a thumb rule. And within categories, you need to build wide enough. Like within billing and AR, for example, there's a bunch of stuff that we're building. You got to have multiple capabilities within a category, but and really specialize, really on your category, if that makes sense. And then if billing and spend management and payroll, whatever, they have great integrations to our ERP, you're set. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, 100%. And I suppose secondary to that, so I mean, obviously your platform integrates with a number of different systems, right? So we mentioned the likes of QuickBooks and Xero, which are kind of entry level, and then we've got the likes of NetSuite or equivalent, which is a more advanced system. From your perspective, is there any more insight using a platform like yours, having a more mature system like a NetSuite, than there is having a system like a Xero or QuickBooks? Because I think that's a question that people will often ask themselves: is, does having a more mature system actually give me more if I am using point solutions on top of it than just stay with a basic finance system? So maybe a bit of anecdotal stuff from you about what people can and can't do from a, I guess, reporting and insight perspective using a more mature ERP versus something that's a little bit more basic.
Yeah, I think there's it's it's really apples and oranges.
Mm.
It's really hard to compare between NetSuite and QuickBooks. And listen, I'm not an expert on those,
Yeah.
but the level of functionality that you have with entry level, like if you're a mid-market B2B SaaS and you're using QuickBooks, which is also being used by a coffee shop,
Mm.
there's also like obviously there's a functionality element to it, but also there's a psychological element to it. Do you remember that I think Senatoring, where they talked about FTX,
Mm.
and they made uh, um, a big joke out of the fact that, I don't know if you remember this, FTX used as a multi-billion-dollar company, they used QuickBooks.
Mm. Mm.
And there was a senator, I think, that kind of made it like, are you kidding me? QuickBooks? Really? QuickBooks? Like, um, so I think it's pretty obvious that you need to graduate, but we do see variance there, and we do see companies that still stretch out QuickBooks to pretty late stages. There's no clear cutoff, of course.
Mm. Mm.
What are you seeing in the market?
For me, it comes down to complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the conversations that I have, um, people come to me saying, look, we think we're ready for the next step. Um, are we? But based on what you know about us as a business in terms of our company size and our number of employees, do you think that solution is relevant to a company of our size? And often I go back, and I don't say size is always irrelevant, yeah. But for me, size is less relevant than complexity. I've worked with plenty of companies that have got reasonably small turnovers that have invested heavily in complex systems because it's the only way that they can operate their business. Likewise, as you say, I've worked with plenty of companies, some massive names. They're only using basic finance systems, and it comes down to what you can and can't do, and also the ecosystem of your other applications, right? And that's why I mentioned the concept of, is there any advantage to having an ERP plugged into something like Receive versus a basic finance system? And I suppose the short answer, to paraphrase what we've both said, is it comes down to the use case and your complexity as a business. So if you are a simple SaaS business whereby the majority of your complexity is just around your billing, so your different types of contracts and that sort of stuff, that might be the only problem that you need to solve for, in which case something like a Receive plus a Xero might be absolutely fine. But likewise, if you are a multifaceted business, whereby it's not just contractual revenue complexity that you've got, and there are other departments, you might have a physical hardware element if you're a reseller that does both the software and the hardware piece, and that's where we start getting into the more complex territory. It's that capability. How many departments are we spanning, and what problem are we solving for? So yeah, I think I'm just echoing what you're saying anyway there, Roy. But yeah, for me, in terms of what I'm seeing in the market, apart from what I mentioned earlier about people holding on to, say, the point solutions longer because they've got more capability with some of these more modern solutions, is people falsely thinking that because they've got to a certain size, they need to have a new system, because if they don't have a problem to solve for, it's a moot point.
Yeah,
So,
I agree, and we see that a good example for that is companies that have huge pricing complexity out of the gate, like
mhm.
as very young companies, like 30, 40 employees, but are in fintech, insurtech, and there's a ton of usage data and pricing complexity. We do very well with those as well. But if, for for less complexity, we tend to sell and work with much larger companies. So I definitely agree.
And I think, just whilst I'm thinking about it, switching things around. So we've said that it's great to have a problem that you're solving for, so that you can enable the tech that's going to help solve that problem. Sometimes people, not just relating to problems, but sometimes people will stop themselves from diversifying their offering because the operational side is too complex. And I've had these conversations before. So, previous businesses, I've always worked for sort of tech resellers in some sort of shape or form. And it's generally comprised of three elements. So you've got licensing, which is, whether you're a reseller or an author, obviously the access to the system, then the support, how's it going to be maintained, and so on and so forth. And then obviously any sort of one-off cost, right? But in the companies that I've worked for in the past, and there is a point to this, I will get to it as quickly as I can. Often the support may just be charged as a percentage of licensing, for example, or as a flat rate per user, for example. And the reason for that is because it's the easiest to administer, not necessarily because it's going to generate the most revenue. So I remember having discussions around, right, well, could we do like a pay per minute support type thing for our smaller customers, and immediately that was vetoed, because the whole premise of tracking time in terms of usage billing was just going to be an absolute nightmare for us. And I think, had it been a couple of years later, if we'd known about some of these platforms that made that piece a lot bit easier to track, stuff like usage billing, we might have had an additional revenue stream there that we wouldn't have been able to facilitate without the tech. So I think people also need to bear in mind that we're not just solving problems, we're also looking for ways to diversify and increase revenue. Yeah, so it's not always a problem to solve. Sometimes it's an ambition to achieve. So that sprang up as we were talking through that. So a little bit of an anecdotal story there, but yeah, I'm sure you've got plenty of experience of looking at ways to diversify revenue with technology, right?
Yeah. I mean, don't get me started. I mean, when we started Received, we spoke with a bunch of CEOs that told us, my invoicing system is my revenue bottleneck or my business model bottleneck. And which is exactly what you just said. And we were like pulling our hairs, like, how is that really a thing in our day and age, that your system is a bottleneck on how you make money, and also, and that kind of, today, that's our DNA. Like, we're one of our missions is to make B2B software companies smarter about their pricing and revenue. Obviously, people out there are smart, but you can be so much smarter if you have a clean and real-time visibility on your cash flow and billing and what's working, and you can do A/B test, and if you can easily open up any pricing model and you can easily build any contract, that's a superpower. If you can easily track your revenue on top of that, that's a superpower. And that's going back to your first point on, how come there are still problems and stuff like that. Yeah, that's still a thing, and we're still working on making that reality.
Making that reality, yeah. And I mentioned it a couple of podcasts back, looking at sort of the 80-20 analysis of basically everything in your business, right? So I often talk about 80-20 in terms of process, so list your habits as a finance team, or your tasks as a finance team, rank them from, the most revenue generating activities to the least revenue generating activities, and then try your very hardest to automate the low value non-revenue generating stuff, and try and, shunt yourself towards that top end of the power curve, as it's often referred to. But the same applies to product offerings in terms of increasing revenue, and the same principle applies to ways that you can find to reduce expenditure, right? And I've used the example of the $2,500 espresso machine before. Because if there's somebody that's willing to pay X amount for a service, there's also a customer that's willing to pay substantially more because they're bought into you, into your business, and they like what you do, right? I think in some instances it's sometimes easier adding a premium level, because with a premium offering often comes less quantity. Yeah. So sometimes you have companies that shift from selling to the mid-market into the enterprise space. They know that maybe the effort to win the deal is going to be more, but they know that actually the lower amount of frequency is going to make maybe life a little bit easier while still maintaining a nice amount of revenue, right? I think where sometimes catches people out is they don't identify what is the lower value offering that we can provide alongside, say, our medium value offering, because it becomes too difficult to administer and too difficult to operate. Yeah. So I mentioned the case of support there, but that could apply to anything. In the ERP world, there's often additions, right? And sometimes some of those additions are quite cost effective. You just don't have the bandwidth to be able to sell at the volume because you don't have the mechanism in place to do it. So, before you even start thinking about systems, that's always my recommendation, is you start thinking about what you want to do in terms of revenue. What can you deliver? So not just what are my tasks, but what we're offering at the moment, how can we increase the value with a premium product, and then how can we reduce the value with maybe a less premium but easy to deliver product, and then look to the tech to see, right, well, how do we facilitate the operating model around those revenue streams? But obviously there's got to be a business case. There's no point in automating something you're never going to sell, right?
I think an interesting point here is that when I went to business school in Chicago, I took pricing course, and the professor, which was amazing, but he told us pricing is under marketing. Like it was taught as a marketing course, and I was scratching my head, and like, in which company marketing oversees pricing? Like it's such an academia thing, and such a disconnect from the real world. Like no CMO, or maybe I'm missing something, but no CMO that I saw, no VP marketing that I saw is overseeing pricing. But that's only like a way to say that actually, like I think specifically in mid-market, probably, okay, if you're Google, you're going to have a pricing team, but in mid-market, like pricing sits under no one. Like it actually sits under the CEO, strategy, stuff like that. And so someone said to me at one point, no one gets a promotion for picking the right billing solution. That's not true. If you bring a system that saves a headcount, makes you smarter, creates data consistency, but also like there's an opportunity for the CFO to champion pricing through systems. You can't champion pricing through spreadsheets. That's just not a possibility. If you're growing, there's a ton of data, there's a ton of complexity. But if you can bring like better pricing approach and smarter pricing approach to the organization, you can really, be a champion, a revenue generating, cash generating person in the organization, and that's pretty rare for a finance leader to do.
Yeah, 100%, 100%, and that's where I always encourage people to read widely and speak with your different departments. Right? So I've worked with teams that are very good, very closely aligned with sales from a revenue perspective, and that's namely to get rid of the disjoint between what salespeople put in their CRM as what's closed won versus what we've actually built in terms of invoicing, which is always a challenge, right? Yeah. But I've mentioned him on the podcast before. There is a guy called Alex Hormozi, Hormozi. And he's a bit of a superstar now. He started as a sort of a gym buff, building gyms, and then he moved into helping others build businesses. So his company is now acquisition.com, and they buy businesses. But he's very hot on social media. He's released books, and he basically shares how he's got to where he's got to in terms of codifying and documenting how he's been so successful. And his first book is called, I think, $100 Million Offers, which is essentially how do you create an offer that positions yourself away from your competitors, right? How do you create an offer that your competitors can't even match, right? And I won't go into the full detail, but essentially the point that I always sort of latch onto from that is the analogy is if you imagine you've only got one customer, yeah, and all of your revenue is coming from one customer, what do you do to create the maximum value to them so that you never ever lose them? Yeah, so, and it requires a really wide thought exercise because you've got to look at your resource, your skills, your capability, what makes you unique as a business. But in going through that thought exercise, you can then start thinking, right, well, actually, my company is unique. And I think that's a mistake that people often make. And again, given my experience in IT resellers, your pricing comes from whatever the average day rate is in the marketplace, right? It's one of those where you just kind of look at, well, our competitors are charging that on an hourly or a daily basis. We think we're a little bit better than them, so maybe we do a £100 a day uplift or something like that. Whereas in reality, the exercise needs to be, right, well, forget about the competition. What's the value? What would somebody be willing to pay? And again, just another little anecdote from the Tory that his origin story of how he built the gym business is he had a framework in his head of how to build gyms in terms of, how to find new customers, how to sell to those customers, and all the operational stuff that came around it. And he would do that physically by going to the gym and running the campaign on site, as a support to the gym when it was first opening. But then he got into a bit of financial trouble. Again, I won't go into the full story, but essentially he phoned up a gym that he was meant to go to, and he said, "I'm so sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it. I just don't have the bandwidth. I'm not going to be able to fly down to see you." And I said, "Okay, that's fine. Well, can you just tell me what you were going to do? Like, just send it to me on an email or send it to me over the phone or something like that." He said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, how much do you want for that? What was effectively his intellectual property, right? And he made up what he thought was a bonkers figure at the time, right? So he said $6,000, thinking that this guy was just going to put down the phone and say, "No, don't worry about it. See you later." But the guy at the other end of the phone said, "Oh, yeah, totally, yeah, no problem. I'll do that," without even batting an eyelid. So I think it's surprising when you have real value at what you can price. I think it's important not to cap yourself. So again, it's a real tangent to what we've been talking about, but I'd always advise, especially when it comes to revenue, to maybe have a bit of a reset and think, right, well, what value do we provide? How much can we charge? And how do we differentiate so we are justified in charging that amount to our customers? So sorry.
No, I love that story. It's about being customer centric. It's about listening to the customer. That's a huge part of value-based pricing, right? It's not just looking at what's happening in market. It's like, like with just what popped into my head was breaking down the wall and Pink Floyd and stuff like that. Like the barrier of, like, if you just look at the market, you're just going to be generic. Actually, in our category, what we see is, I think that Stripe really made popular the percentage point based pricing.
Yes.
So everything that any product that you take from Stripe is percentage based. They have no license or anything like that. It's just shaving off basis points off of your revenue and profit. And incumbents in our category do that. And we spoke with our customers, and pretty early on they say, we absolutely hate that pricing. Like, why is my revenue yours for the taking? Like, why? And everyone did it. It's like this market coordination, and we price differently because we listen to them. And it just doesn't make sense to price in a way. It's not even the price point, it's kind of the mechanism. It doesn't make sense to price in a way that your customer hates. Right? So I love that idea of customer closeness, and really, like, looking at one customer. Okay, what does this person, Alan, a CFO in a Acme core, what do they want? And I love that.
Yeah, but customers will pay for speed even if they don't like the pricing model. and this is a personal anecdote. So some of the resources I provide, I sell through Gumroad, which is
Mm-hmm.
quite a well-known platform, right? And the percentage they take of your revenue is a lot, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, but people are willing to use them because you can literally sell something in 60 seconds. You just create an account, you upload whatever you want to sell, and then you're away. Right, so I might not like that, but I don't care because money now is better than money later, right? so
Yeah,
so
but that's when you're starting. So
yes,
now the differentiation between SMB and mid market plays
uh,
a role, because no company, and sorry, but no company worth their salt uses Stripe. Stripe for SMB, okay, that's like okay, a monopoly by this point, but like everyone graduates. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Sorry for cutting you.
No, that's fine, and I totally agree. I totally agree. But taking payments out of the equation, there are sometimes mechanisms whereby you can say it doesn't even have to be a percentage, but there are ways whereby you can be creative with your price if you're able to facilitate a service quicker than your competitors, right?
Of
Yeah, and I
course.
think that's one of the takeaways as well.
Yeah.
So, um, one of the points that you raised when we were speaking previously, it's quite interesting, is the CFO in a down market. And I don't like these podcasts to be doom and gloom or anything like that, but obviously there's been difficulties recently around sort of cost of living, and I don't know how it is for you in the US at the moment, but in the UK, the price of my weekly coffee, for example, has gone up quite considerably. So literally having done nothing just to live, the pricing has gone up quite a lot. So what you mentioned that I found quite interesting is how does a CFO in a down market change? How does their pricing strategy change? What do they care about in a down market? So I'd love for you to speak about that because it's not a perspective that we hear very often. So over to you. You can explain a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. First of all, there's no reason why we shouldn't talk about down market. We're living it, and you can live in denial, but I find it's helpful to just face reality and see how you come out winning on the other end. But I think let's start with the softer side and then move on to the harder stuff.
Yeah.
Um, the softer side, I think, is that we're seeing more communication.
Mm,
Why does communication between CFOs and CFO communities matter in a down market? Is because in a down market, because of the volatility and the craziness happening around, you can throw all your assumptions out the window, basically. So um, I've been in the Gartner CFO conference a couple of months ago in Washington D.C. and the amount of conversation and enthusiasm to meet other CFOs and talk with them. Like the important stuff was actually happening outside sessions
yeah.
and in breakfasts and stuff like that.
Mm,
We facilitated a CFO roundtable where we brought together 50 CFOs in one room, and there was like electricity. Everyone was just excited to hear how other CFOs are doing things in such a market, because in a bull run, in a growth market, things are easy.
mm,
But now that's where people are learning from one another.
mm,
So communication is huge in a down market, and CFOs, I think, get that. Specifically, it's because CFOs today more than ever are kind of mini founders. They're really the second hand to the CEO, and they're a very important figure in the organization. Um, on the more like concrete stuff, obviously you got the cash burn and runway and stuff like. I think that's kind of run of the mill. I'll just I'll mention one thing shortly that we're seeing in market, and then dwell on the more unique stuff. Like one thing that we're seeing in terms of like metrics is that is the balance between variables and fixed cost.
mm,
Like there's so much more weight today on variable unit economics,
mm,
LTV, CAC payback. Like CAC payback used to be like anywhere between 5 and 12 months. There's a huge emphasis on that today. churn, renewals, total contract value, stuff that was, before this it was growth,
mm,
booking, pretty
mm,
simple,
mm,
but now people are really, going into this unit, this intangible unit in a SaaS company. How much does it cost me sales, marketing, stuff like that, and how fast do I pay it back, and also which customers are not worth it, which customers were there for growth but are not profit making, and I need to cut them loose. So
mm,
we're definitely seeing that. The more unique stuff, like in our world, is OpenView VC talks about this a lot. This big battle between SaaS and usage pricing,
mm,
right?
mm.
No one's gonna win. I mean, the future is complex. It's not like a real battle. Like no, it's not like SaaS or usage. But
Yeah.
most SaaS companies now have at least some usage pricing in their models, and
Mm,
that's a good thing, I think, for flexibility.
yeah.
But what we're seeing now is actually contradicting pressure. And what is that contradiction? Investors, what do they want? They want stability, right? So
Mm,
they're saying to their heavy usage portfolio, you gotta move to more licenses, you gotta make it more repeatable,
mm,
right? So those CFOs are encountering that pressure, and guess what? What do customers want? They don't want the other end of stability, which is paying that 30K ACV upfront.
mm, mm,
They want a pay-as-you-go usage pricing.
mm,
So now CFOs are kind of in between these two pressures. Customers want usage and flexibility. Investors want the other thing. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're definitely seeing these two things, and CFOs, at least, as going back to the point about flexibility, they need systems to also facilitate for that. So that's a really interesting thing to see and live through.
mm. And it's from a customer's perspective, it's I think flexibility is important, and I can only really speak as an individual solopreneur or whatever I'm termed at, depending on the trendy term at the time, right? But for me, flexibility is important, and I use an example. So, one of the AI tools that I help with transcripts and show notes, I looked at it recently and I thought, right, well, I can just use ChatGPT for that, right? So I stopped paying for it, and then immediately found that actually it took me twice as long using ChatGPT as I did the AI tool, right? But I wasn't contractually committed to that company. I'd always done it on a monthly basis, and I just went straight back to them, right? Whereas if they'd said to me, right, well, the only way for you to use our service is to, pay annually up front, I would have never gone ahead with it, right? So that's when that decision piece comes from. And I appreciate, we're not talking about, apples with apples in my space compared to the mid-market space, right? But I think some of these concepts do, they're kind of evergreen. It doesn't really matter size, risk is still a thing and reluctance is still a thing, right? So and I do often see that as well. So some of the solutions I've worked with in the past, the only option has been right where you pay for your licensing up front, whether it's 50 grand or whatever. If you want to pay on a quarterly basis, great, but we charge you a premium for it. And that's not really at the moment conducive to that. But it's a toss up, isn't it? Do we want to get revenue now and offer that flexibility in our contracts, even though they might disappear after 6 months? Or do we accept that we might get less contracts, but the total contract value is going to be more because we are getting, more upfront? So as I say, it's a difficult one. It's business specific at the end of the day, isn't it?
And communication is a big part of it. Like two things to think about there is how you frame things is really important. I read a post about a company we shall not name, but they disguised their price increase by saying, "Oh, now we're going to charge for that." But they always that was always there. So what are you really doing? You're disguising the way you increase price, and now your customers are not stupid. you know just say say where you're coming from, and it's this is the reality, and just communicate well. And that the second thought is, which is kind of related, is there's also a distinction between existing customers and new customers, and communication and how you frame things for those two is quite different, because with existing customers, the friction and the conversation is much harder,
Mm,
especially when you're selling to enterprises, especially when your ACVs are tens of thousands of dollars, and even more than that.
mm,
Those are pretty hard conversations, and it matters if it's a new customer or existing one.
mm, mm. Yeah, I was having to think about something then, and we'll come back to it. It's fine. I almost had something that I thought was going to be really, really profound there, but I lost it just at the last minute. But
I
it's fine.
can wait. If it's really profound, let's wait for it.
We might be waiting for a while. I'll message you if it comes back. But no, I'm conscious of your time, Roy. So, have you got time for two more questions or one more
Yes,
question?
yes, I'm good at time.
Yeah, fine, fine. So, the first question is mainly around evolution and maybe a prediction, even though I don't really like predictions because I don't really think they ever come true, because you don't know until you know, right? But from your experience, obviously we've talked a little bit about the evolution of point solutions and how maybe people, especially if they're a more modern CFO, will build an ecosystem of point solutions versus moving on to an ERP. But what do you think the next step in that is? And it doesn't have to relate to AI. I know AI is a big topic at the moment, but what do you see in terms of next steps in terms of the evolution of the CFO tech stack?
There's two certainties in life. One is tax, and the other one is that you're gonna get asked about AI.
I didn't ask about it. I said you could talk about it, but didn't have to.
No, I just saw an open for a joke, so I took it.
Yeah.
But but our space is moving, and I bet other spaces. I see mostly what's happening in my space. And we kind of touch about that. So just to finish the thought from before, I think we're going to see consolidation.
Mhm,
Again, not building for the ERP, but you're going to have wider category-wide solutions
mhm,
that fit your needs within that category. So, for example, in our space, you can be very narrow. You can say, "I only do usage pricing. I
mhm,
only do usage billing." And the widest thing would be to say, "I do quote to cash."
mhm,
All the way from quote all the way to cash applications, right? Um, I think, like in our category, anywhere between billing, AR, and invoice to cash and quote to cash. So many names for one category. Seriously, um, we're gonna see a consolidation towards quote to cash. We're already seeing that with M&A activity and big incumbents building more solutions. We're doing that. Like currently we do billing, usage, payments, contract management, pricing, all that stuff. But we're like in an arms race. We know that. Like
yeah,
RevRec is coming really soon, and quote is coming really soon, and a bunch of stuff is coming really soon. The product bar is high. Like no one cares that you're a startup. No one cares about your problems. No one's coming to save you. People want a one-stop shop, at least within a category, and I think we're going to see more of that.
yeah. And I'd agree, and we're already seeing it. And again, not talking too much about AI because people are probably fed up of me talking about it now, right? But that tool that I mentioned that I stopped using and then started using again,
Mm-hmm.
that's a narrow use case, yeah, for a specific segment in a specific industry. Yeah, I think you're right that we're going to have more of these verticalized point solution. I think it's great, because if you have the bee's knees of a certain piece of tech that's directly relatable to the way that you run your business, all good. I think the difficulty is going to be is people being able to find it. Yeah. And we've seen a proliferation of a lot of these sort of, product hunt and all of those sorts of, and it's more of a sales and marketing conversation than anything else, right? But I think
Hmm.
to the end customer, companies like yours, companies like mine, we need to be very mindful of the searchability of things.
Of course.
So I think that's going to be the downside to it. I think it's great because I'm all for smaller businesses providing, narrow technology to really help businesses. But my concern has always been how do we put the right tech in front of the right people, right?
Yeah, I think the YC, the Y Combinator
Yeah.
school, they have this approach of don't do marketing; it's a waste of time. Just do sales at the start. I think it's rubbish. I
Yeah.
think it's for some industries maybe, but for nurture, like for inbound nurture led, you need to see in B2B SaaS, especially in mid market, you
Mm.
don't just adopt on spot. You gotta know the story. You gotta see the brand in many touch points. You gotta have get an email from them, which is great. Not just any email, not generic, like great content. You gotta see them on LinkedIn. You gotta see them on podcasts, for example. You gotta see them in multiple instances before you even start. Like. Consider them as a solution. So we're all in on storytelling, on marketing. We think it's so important, very early on, from like day zero. Of course,
And
can't
I
agree more.
think, and you fall into this category because obviously you're building something that's very useful. Is I think referrals, as much as they're probably one of the oldest means of building business, are
Hmm.
now more important than ever. And again, something else that Alex Hormozy said is that it's the benefit of referrals is that there is a chain. You're not just paying once for a customer, you're delivering value to a customer that can then refer you to another customer, that can then refer you to another customer, and then refer you to another customer. But it's the value that is not to be underestimated. You need to find a way to create so much value that people have got no other option but to recommend it to like-minded businesses. Because as you're saying, if you're in a room with 50 other CFOs, and they've all invested in this tool and they're all in the same industry, people are going to talk. And of course, it works the other way as well. If you get shit service, is going to go the other way, right? So
Yeah,
I think that's another way to break through the noise without having to invest hundreds of thousands in marketing, is to make your product as viral as possible. It's difficult. It is difficult. So yeah, I have massive respect for you, but I don't envy you.
and CFOs, they need that. They need that because they still have that risk aversion. And I'll tell you, I see that on the sales side. I use Apollo. I don't know if you know that platform.
Yeah,
I'm
love
like I'm a super user. I love it so much, and it's wide. It has everything I need. And I tell any founder that's willing to listen to me that Apollo is the one system that you need. I
yeah.
don't have any incentive but wanting to help other founders. So yeah, of course, referrals is always gonna be a huge part of B2B.
Yeah,
Always, of
and
course.
that's why. And again, this is where I guess finance can really start showing off their business partnering skills. Is it's not just about sales team anymore. It's about product team. And I remember all of the old stories about the likes of was it Asana or something similar to that that basically said we don't have salespeople. We've just got a support team. So
Mm.
we get people on a trial. And if people want to buy it, they ask questions to the support team and then they just check out online. So I think it's one of those where finance will have no option but to bridge the gap, because if they're seeing a downturn in revenue, for example, it might not be necessarily that the sales team aren't selling enough. It might be that the product offering itself isn't facilitating something that people are wanting to adopt, especially if you've got sort of a product-led growth strategy that starts with a freemium model and then builds from there, right? So,
Yes.
and just mentioning Apollo there, that's what triggered that thought, because they've ticked all the boxes. You don't need any training on it. Yeah, so it's phenomenally quick to set up. It's super easy. Like you searching for a company or a contact. That's about it. Do you want to sync it to your CRM system? Great. Just turn it on. Do you see what I mean? And that leads to that virality because firstly, it's free, and anything free is obviously easy to circulate in the first instance, right? Oh yeah, no, just get up and running with that, right? But then obviously that ease of use and just the fact that it works, just works. You see what I mean? The barrier to entry is so low. So anyway, we could talk about this for ages, right? So the last question I've got for you, and the only things that you can't say are Notion and your smartphone, because we've had those too many times before. But the question I often ask is relating to either your personal or professional life. Is there an app on your phone, a piece of software, or even we've had people talk about like Fitbits and Garmin's and that sort of stuff in the past as well. So what piece of tech or gadget could you not live without?
Oh my God! Now I gotta come up with a good answer. What Notion, and what was the other no? I
Smart,
wasn't as
just
oh
yeah.
okay. I think MD Agle from Zora said that in her podcast. I'm a big spreadsheet guy, and like I leave my tasks and my everything is in my spreadsheet, and we manage our weekly meetings over Google Docs. I love a Google spreadsheet. I mean, I know it's rudimentary, but I think the best things in life are simple, and not, again, going back to the point, there's nothing wrong with a spreadsheet. I just love the old doc and spreadsheet, and if you use them well with a great cadence and communication, that's gonna do the job. Like if you poorly manage stuff in personal life and in your organization, no fantasy system is gonna do that. So sorry for the simple. Oh, okay. I have one thing. Yeah, because I understand it's kind of a generic answer. Like, okay, it's a yawn, but there is an app called Time Shifter. I travel a lot, and I suffer from jet lag pretty severely. And Time Shifter, here again, I'm happy to recommend it. They charge like a ridiculous $20 fee for a full year, I think.
How dare they?
And maybe I shouldn't say that, but they tell you when to sleep, when to consume caffeine, when to get light exposure, and it's a lifesaver, let me tell you. So if you're traveling a lot, especially between like a big gap of time zones, go to Time Shifter.
And also for people that work shifts as well. I'm just looking at it now.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
That's brilliant. We've not had that one before, so that's amazing.
Great.
So thank you for that. The other thing that I'll touch on with your Google Docs and your Google Sheets, just because I don't think it's boring at all. I'm a big fan. So all of the guides that I write, they're done in Google Docs, right? I think people don't necessarily understand the power of a Google Doc compared to Microsoft Word, for example, because it's so easy to plug in extensions. Yeah, so there's a whole Google app marketplace for docs and sheets whereby you can supercharge that. And I remember when ChatGPT first came out, and this was before they started building AI into Notion, so it could give you inspiration for posts and that sort of stuff. But I basically copied GitHub code on how to add ChatGPT to Google Docs. So all I'd need to do would be to highlight a sentence, click on ChatGPT, and it would then spit out inspiration based on that theme. And it's the same in Google Sheets. There's a ChatGPT for Google Sheets plugin. There's a machine learning plugin for Google Sheets that will allow you to pick a date range, and it will give predictions off the back of that. So, yeah, maybe the base concept of a document or a spreadsheet is boring, but I think people underestimate how powerful they can be when you start equipping them with some of these plugins. And a lot of them are often free. I'll put them in the show notes. So no, it's fine. I've no problem with those recommendations, right? No problems at all.
Well, actually, you inspired me to try those because I haven't really integrated any of those into my Google Sheets and spreadsheets. So
I'll send you the link. So the ChatGPT one's good from a data cleansing point of view.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so if you think about sometimes where you've got a column of data whereby there's variances in the way that something's typed. So maybe something
Yes.
has a capital letter, maybe something doesn't.
Tell me about
Maybe
it.
limited is spelled out instead of LTD or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But the best use case I found is that you could basically pick three rows and you could add a column to say that this is the original text, this is what it should be. And then in dragging them down, ChatGPT would then look at your translation to understand how the human had done it, and then it would apply that logic without having to have any sort of formula behind it. So I'll send you the link to that. The
Nice.
simple ML sheets is really good as well, just to do a bit of sort of high level predictions. If you've got some fairly basic data, I wouldn't suggest you do if it's really advanced, but that's a cool one as well. But I'll send you the links.
Love
Um,
it. Thank you.
there's a ton of others, of course, but we don't have time. So, but it's been an absolute pleasure, Roy. I'll let you get off, but no, it's been a really insightful conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully
Same
we
here.
do this again in 6-12 months, or I hope you've not got enough time in the next 6-12 months because you're running a massive business whereby you've not got time to speak to me anymore. But no, it'd be good to have a catch up, see how things have developed. But no, I'll finish by thanking you again. It's been excellent.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed the talk, and thanks for the opportunity. Thanks
No worries.
for having me.
Perfect. Speak soon. Cheers.
Okay. Cheers.